Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today we will be ranking Tom Ford eyeshadow palettes. I have 29 of them, and the best part, I do have a look for almost all of them. I think 26 out of the 29. So I will be flashing a photo with an eye look for each one of them. So if you want to see that, please keep on watching. These 29 palettes, obviously, I love, I use, and I've been collecting them for a while. And I never bought these palettes for the sake of reviewing them because my YouTube channel has been around only for a few months. So I obviously bought these palettes because I love Tom Ford and I see value in his eyeshadows. I love Tom Ford eyeshadows. I think they're very easy to use. They're extremely blendable. If you're a professional woman like me, I think you would love having a few of those in your collection because they just, most of them apply by themselves. So I was kind of thinking, how do I rank these? And I settled on two things. I settled on the following criteria. Number one, quality. Yes, some Tom Ford palettes are better than other ones. Now the second thing would be my personal preference. So that's just a matter of opinion, which ones I grab on the most and which ones are the ones that I have noticed that I really adore. Okay, in last place, I have to put this palette. And this is the Rose Cashmere, and it's part of the Shade and Illuminate palette. I'm only including these in the ranking because these palettes are still available for purchase. Now, this is the wet dry formula, and there's nothing particularly wrong with this eyeshadow palette, but the colors are a little bit more sheer than I want them to be. There's not a lot of pigment, especially of this pretty pink here is a very sheer color. You can see in the picture, and I had to really work at getting this application. So I don't think that you get these Shade and Illuminate palettes specifically for the eyeshadow quads. I think you get it because they're easy to travel, and the bronzer actually and the highlighter are just spectacular. If anything, I do prefer, and I love the bronzer and the highlighter more than the eyeshadows by far, actually. Next one is Red Harness out of the other Shade and Illuminate palette. This one is also the wet dry formula. These are a little bit more pigmented and they're metallic, very metallic, and a little bit easier to apply. I think it's giving you a little bit more color payoff, but I just wasn't a really big fan of the color story. You know, this very bright orange coppery color did not make sense with anything else. I think it's still a beautiful palette. It's just obviously not my favorite if I'm putting it in spot number 28. And in number 27, I have to go to Moonlit Violet, which is also in the Shade and Illuminate palette. This quad is actually beautiful. I do love purples. I have green eyes, kind of green blue eyes, so purples go very well with green eyes and also brown eyes. So I love purple eyeshadows, and I think just the whole color story here is beautiful because although the lightest shade in the quad is not extremely light, I think you compensate with this very stark highlighter. So I think everything goes very well in this palette. And now everything else that I have is quads. So we have 26 eyeshadow quads. And I'm not gonna keep count because I'm gonna forget which number I am, so I'll keep a count up here, and then also obviously I'll be flashing photos with the eye looks because I have eye looks for I think all of these. Okay, next up, Soleil Neige. I do love the color story here, undoubtedly. And this is kind of a more unique color story for Tom Ford because it's on the dark side. There's this beautiful dark blue and this beautiful black. Unfortunately, this formula is a little crumbly. Now these are metallic, and I think if you wet them, you're getting what you want, but if you use them dry, there's a lot of fallout and they're very crumbly. They're just not of the typical quality of Tom Ford eyeshadow quads. But other than that, it's still a beautiful palette. Next in line, Soleil D'Hiver. Now, I love the name here. Soleil D'Hiver actually means winter sun. Yeah, I had to look up all the names and I learned a little bit of French just because of all these quads. But I do like this color story. This is obviously a very easy look, but the formula is a little bit denser than all the other ones that he has and a little bit more difficult to pick up. And that's why I'm ranking it so low here, just because the formula is not as buttery as some of his other quads. Other than that, this is a beautiful palette. As you can see, I've been using it a lot ever since it came out. I like the color story here, but at the same time, is this anything very, very unique? I don't know. I wish that this shade was a little darker so it gives me a little bit more contrast, but I still love this palette. I think it's beautiful. Next up, Double Indemnity. Now, I absolutely adore this palette, and only because of this green. This green shade is very, very unique, and I usually have a hard time finding a green shadow that matches my eyes, because my eyes are kind of green, but sometimes if I choose a very pigmented grass green, it just kind of doesn't go. So I love this this shade of green is spectacular. I love the color story. I'm only ranking it that low because of the black. The other three are fine, but the black one is just very crumbly. It's a little dry, and there's a lot of fallout when you're using the black. And I feel like the black should have been maybe a little bit less metallic, because it is the darkest shade in the palette. But this palette is gorgeous. I create beautiful looks with this palette. Next up, First Frost. This is one of the most recent additions to his collection. This came out probably about 3 months ago. I absolutely adore this kind of a cool pink. This pink is beautiful. I like the color story here. It's not anything shockingly unique, but it's still beautiful. The quality on this is decent, but compared to some of the other shadows that he has, it's not of supreme quality. These are very metallic. I think they go better on the eye if you wet them, because if you use them dry, they're a little on the crumbly side, just like the other ones that I just mentioned. But other than that, this is a beautiful, beautiful quad. I still adore it. Next up, Visionaire. Now, I always create really, really good looks with that palette. And for some reason, there's something not quite there for me with that palette. I don't know if it's because these two shadows are kind of too close to each other. I wish that one of them was a little deeper. I do like the special shade here. The special shade is beautiful. I think this is a good palette, but the eyeshadows are a little on the powdery side and not as finely milled as I would want them to be. Still a beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous palette though. This also came out, I think, early last year. Next up, Silver Topaz. Now, I actually adore this palette, predominantly because I have a really big spot in my heart for cool palettes. I love cool tones, I love neutral tones, but specifically cool tones. The only issue that I have with this palette is I wish that the darker shade, the darkest shade here, was even darker, or maybe even black, because there's not a lot of contrast amongst those, you know, four. If I want to create a very smoky look, which when I think about silver and gray, that what I want a smoky look. This is not the darkest brown that I can get, and I wish it was a little darker. But other than that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this palette. I love that they're finely milled, they're not really powdery, there's absolutely no fallout. These apply like a dream, by the way. The color story looks a little flat to me. That's it. Other than that, beautiful, gorgeous palette as well if you like cool tones. Sous Le Sable, under the sand. That's what it means in translation, by the way. Yes, I looked it up as well. This is also a gorgeous palette. This one came out last year, I think also in the beginning of the year. But look at the color story. It's a little, these shadows, these three shadows here are so close to each other that I wish that one of them had a little bit more. This shadow here, by the way, is absolutely gorgeous. This has a lot of sheen. This is my favorite shade in the whole palette. But if you look at overall the color story, these are just so close to each other, they almost look identical. And yes, you can create a very easy, very fast, work appropriate eye look if you're looking for something just a little bit of color. But in my case, I can barely even use this shadow. It's even lighter than my eyelid. I don't dislike it, but you cannot, if you're gonna buy one palette from Tom Ford, cannot be only this one. You have to couple it with something else. And that's probably the intent here. Maybe that's why he released this one, so you can couple it with other stuff. Because I do like the quality of these. They're actually, these, especially these two shadows here, are so buttery and beautiful. They blend like a dream. I just wish that I had a little bit more of a interesting pop of something here. That's it. Next up, Virgin Orchid. Okay, this palette is gorgeous. This is again the wet dry formula. I don't know why I don't grab for that palette. I think I was slightly disappointed because the shadows seem a little dry when you use them dry, when you don't wet them. The color story of this is absolutely gorgeous. Just look at these purples and rosy pinks and more of this plum deep purple. So next I'll give it to Titanium Smoke. Another cool palette. There is absolutely nothing that I don't like about this palette. The only thing is why I'm ranking it so low is because this obviously is amazing for a very smoke look, maybe more of a night look. I mean, nowadays it doesn't matter, and plus there are no rules in makeup. If you want to put this palette on at 7 o'clock in the morning, and that's really up to you. Sometimes I do it. Leopard Sun. I usually have a lot of fun with this palette. It kind of brightens my day. It makes me happy. I mean, look how pretty this is. Now, Soleil et Lune. I know that a lot of people love the mint green here. Yes, I love it as well. It's a very special kind of a green. The problem is how many people can pull off that green and exactly when can you do it, because it's a very metallic green. Yes, it's beautiful, I love it, but I noticed that every time I grab with this palette, I very rarely would even use the green. I would use the other three because I love the other three shadows, but not the mint green. So number 15, Pretty Baby. This palette is insane. I love it. Tom Ford knows how to do his purples, and purples, the formula of purple sometimes is difficult to accomplish, so it's not either pigmented or it's patchy. None of his purples are this way, and this palette is the epitome of purple done the right way. I think the color story here is amazing. This duochrome shade here, the special shade, is just so amazing. I love it, and I'm not even so much into duochrome or triochromes, but look at this beautiful thing. I think it's duochrome done the right way because it's subtle. There is a subtle hint of a little bit of orange, like a sun glow, and then you have the purple and the pink, and it's just so beautiful. I love this palette. In number 14, this is absolutely my favorite purple palette by Tom Ford, and I'm talking about Daydream. These purples are so pigmented yet so easy to apply. There's no fallout, there's no patchiness. They apply by themselves, and I'm not even talking about when you wet them. I'm talking about dry. I think this is one of the best purple palettes that I have. Beautiful. Lucky 13, Golden Mink. Now this also came out last year, and I know it wasn't a favorite for a lot of people, but I'm only putting it here because it's versatile. So you can create a very day work appropriate look, or you can amp it up because it has these two special shades here that are very sheeny, very sparkly. Obviously they're not glittery, but they're really, really beautiful. This is just the right amount of elegance in this palette. It looks great on camera, and it's very, very easy to put on. I mean, these actually basically apply by themselves. Next up, Burnished Amber. Now, I prefer cool shadows or neutral shadows, and very rarely I will find a warm palette that I'm absolutely crazy about, and I think this is one of them. I think the color story here is so cohesive and so elegant when you put it on your eyes that it's just, I cannot help it. I absolutely love it. I think the quality here is just perfection. No, you don't have any special shades. There's no shimmery shades, but these are all so satin and just at the same time blendable and just beautiful. This palette has been discontinued, but there's still some places that you can find it. There are a few retailers on Amazon that you can find it, and I'm talking about Last Dance. Now, I love everything about this palette. I love the name, Last Dance. I love the color story. This blue is probably the most spectacular shade that Tom Ford has ever came out with. This blue is amazing. I don't know why this palette got discontinued. They're buttery, they're blendable, all of the eyeshadows here. So what I did for my look, I actually put the green on the bottom and then I put this on top, so I kind of subdued the blue. So it became a little bit more of my eye color. My eyes kind of tend to change. Actually, they're green, sometimes they lean blue, sometimes gray. So it's very difficult when I have just a blue palette or just a green palette. Sometimes I need a palette like this one. Okay, so now we've reached the top 10, and these are obviously my absolute favorite ones. In number 10 is my oldest palette in my collection. I think it's probably 5-6 years old. It doesn't look like I have to declutter it yet, but I remember a few years ago, 2 years ago, I decluttered quite a few because they were just getting too old, and unfortunately eyeshadow expires. You cannot keep it forever, and regretfully most of those palettes have been discontinued and I can no longer find them, but that's how it is with makeup. You use it, you know, you buy it, you declutter it, you buy new makeup. That's how it is. So in number 10, Seductive Rose. Again, as you can see, this is my most used palette because it's the oldest one. So I wish this palette never gets discontinued. Again, purples, but the right way of doing purples, because this palette is just gorgeous. This is a purple palette that I think anybody can wear because the purples here are just very sophisticated. They're very subtle. Also, the two shimmery shades are amazing as just toppers. Gorgeous. I think it's very universal, yet sophisticated, yet fun at the same time. Number 9, Mink Mirage. Now, I'm putting this palette in number 9 because I need a palette like this. This one obviously replaces Cocoa Mirage, and it's just a favorite palette of all of us. Now, I decluttered Cocoa Mirage because it was just very old, and I had traveled with it all the time. It was a little beaten up. Now, I have to say this though, and this may shock you, but I think I like this palette a little bit even more. In Cocoa Mirage, there was no black shade. I can create the fastest, easiest, work-appropriate, professional eye makeup look with this palette. These shadows are blendable, they're buttery, they apply by themselves. They're so easy to apply. So you can use it on its own, or you can use it with any other palette. And that's why I love the fact that it has a black here, because I can only use the black. If you want to intensify a look on another palette, on any other palette, not just Tom Ford palettes, I can use the black here, and the black is just of a supreme quality, by the way. So I do like this palette a lot. That's why I'm putting it in my top 10. Next up, Meteoric. Now, this palette is just easy. All the shadows here, all 4 of them, are of impeccable quality. You can create a whole look with just 2 shadows, all 4 of them, or you can just use one of these here, the special shades, just all over the lid, and you're done. This palette is easy. It's very versatile, it's elegant, it's playful at the same time, it's beautiful. Next up is a favorite for a lot of people, and I'm talking about Suspicion. This palette is gorgeous, obviously wet dry formula, but the reason why I'm not ranking it in my top 5 is not basically on the quality, it's not because of the color story, but it's the fact that I'm just prefer cool tones rather than very warm tones. In number 6, Noir Fume, or Black Smoke, is it? This palette is, it took my breath away the first time actually when I applied it on my eye, and I'll tell you why. You look at this palette, it doesn't look like a very special color story, right? I mean, you apply this on your eye, it actually gives you this look. This shade here and this shade are actually satin, but this one leans green. It has a beautiful khaki sheen to it. Look at how gorgeous this is. It took my breath away when I applied this on my eye, actually. It's just so beautiful, and at the same time it's so buttery and smooth, and it just glides on your eyelid, and I have dry eyelids, so I need something very, very buttery. I mean, I think I've never had a problem with any of the Tom Ford eyeshadows. Your eyelid does not look dry with none of these. Love this palette. For day, for night, for smoky look, for work appropriate look, for a date night, for anything you want. This is really, really versatile. This is a spectacular palette. I absolutely love it. Okay, top 5. This was actually easy, and I guarantee you my pick for the winner, for number 1, may surprise you a little bit. It actually surprised me. When I sat down to rank these and I was kind of playing chess with them for a little bit, my number 1 choice surprised me as well, because it was definitely obvious which one it is. Now I'm wearing one of the top 5. Can you guess which one it is? Can you guess? So in number 5, I have to definitely give it to Nude Dip. This palette I've had for a while. This palette is just universal. Anybody can wear this. The quality is spectacular. It's wet dry formula, so you can amp up the metallic shine, or you can just use them dry, and even when you use them dry, there's no fallout, there's no struggle. These apply by themselves. They're buttery, they're smooth. If anything, I feel like they make my eyelid smoother instead of being kind of crepey and old looking, because I have dry eyelids. This palette is gorgeous. Do not want to be without this palette in my collection. That's how much I love it. If I cannot think of anything else that I want to play with that day, I always grab onto this palette, just because it's easy. There's nothing to think about. It's so obvious how you need to apply these. There's no thinking. It's just on autopilot when you're using this palette. And yet you have fun with it, because you can amp up the look by wetting them and making them more metallic. Number 4, Honeymoon. Honeymoon, honeymoon, honeymoon. Love the name, love the color story, love the shadows. I always have so much fun playing with this. It always gives you this very kind of vibrant but yet sophisticated, very elegant look. I love this palette so much. Love it. In number 3, this may surprise you a little bit, but this palette was actually my most used palette, Tom Ford palette of 2020. And considering I have, 29 of them, and I have other palettes from other brands, For some reason, I loved using this one. If I had a date night or if I wanted to look good, but I wanted to look polished, yet a little playful, I would go to this palette. And I'm talking about Disco Dust. This palette is perfection. This palette is exactly what you want in a neutral palette. It has everything. It has a very nice taupey shade that you can use for your crease. It has this beautiful satin to deepen your crease, and then the brown is actually quite nice and dark and pigmented enough that you can create a smoky look, or you can just line your eyes if you want with it. I love it. And then you have the pop of the special shade, which obviously I have loved a lot and used a lot. Look how pigmented and beautiful this is. You can just apply it with your finger or with a brush, it doesn't matter. This palette is so universal. This palette is a must. No wonder why I gravitate towards using it. No wonder why I used it so much in 2020. This is just an easy palette to use, yet it creates the most elegant but interesting eye. It's not about, this palette looks a little boring, but it's not. That's the trick, and I think that's the value of all Tom Ford eyeshadow palettes, most of them. Some of them look boring, but then you start putting on the eye and you are amazed, you're wowed, because it's fun playing with these. That's the best thing about this palette, it always looks good. Second place goes to Body Heat. Who doesn't love that palette? I certainly adore this palette, and I'm even a person who likes cool tones and neutral tones. This one is not the coolest palette, right? This palette is more on the warm side. I would say neutral, but because of this shade, you know, obviously it leans a little bit warm, but this palette is so much fun to play with. And again, this palette could be very universal and very neutral if you apply a sheer layer of these, and then you can amp up the look with either wetting them, or even if you don't wet them, because this is the wet dry formula as well. But even if you don't wet the eyeshadows, these are just spectacular on the eye. Number one. Can you guess which one it is? It was a surprise to me actually when I picked this one, and I definitely have to give it to Mercurial. He just knocked it out of the park with this one. So obviously this palette is a combination between Nude Dip and Honeymoon. So the upper two shades are the upper two shades from Nude Dip, and then the lower two shades are very similar, if not identical, to Honeymoon. So if you have Nude Dip and Honeymoon, you probably don't need this one. I have to say, what I love about this palette is the contrast between the upper row and the lower row. See, in Honeymoon, the upper row, these are a little darker. And I love the juxtaposition between the very deep shadows and the very light, the one that are kind of from Nude Dip. I don't know if it's in my head, but I don't think so. I think the quality of the bottom row from Honeymoon and Mercurial, I think it's better in Mercurial. This shadow is a little bit more vibrant compared to the one in Honeymoon, and it's a little bit more, it's softer and it's a little bit more buttery. It's not that the one in Honeymoon is dry, but it's a little bit more dry than this one in Mercurial. So there you go, Mercurial is now my favorite palette. Maybe the excitement of this being new and being a combo between two of my other two favorite palettes is still kind of present. Maybe it wears off next year, so I have a different favorite, but for now this is definitely my favorite palette. I love this palette. This palette is just the easiest thing to use, and again, I think it's universally flattering for absolutely everyone. And which one do I have on my eyes? Did you guess? So it's not the Mercurial. I have body heat on my eye today. I do love this palette. Obviously I'm putting it in number 2, so, but I haven't used it in a while, so that's why I decided to put it on my eye today. But so this is it for me. I hope you enjoyed this. This was 29 palettes ranked by Tom Ford. I really want to hear from you. If you have a different favorite, I would love for you to send me a note and let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and I will see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye.